I did consider having a bit of a rest this Sunday, but for some reason I thought, no, I still want to do one. I'm going to try and get to 50 Sunday sound bites and then I might take a rest. Okay. Um, so I'm not feeling 100% at the moment. You can probably see that. I'm a little bit gaunt. I'm not eating well, etc. So, I'm not feeling particularly brilliant, but hey, whatever. It's a change you have to manage when you get to my age. So, what, again, just as a reminder, are we going to talk about today? Well, simply, we're going to talk about principles and not plans to manage change management. Sounds interesting, doesn't it? Kind of. Anyway, a while back, the Oxford Business Review, who I do tend to use a lot, did some research to see if they could create a roadmap or a set of stages for delivering successful organisational change from existing models that worked. Guess what? They couldn't. Not one model worked consistently. Anyway, so they did some more research, more extensive research, yeah. And during that research, what they found was 6 key principles to consider when planning an organisational change process. Those 6 principles, at a high level, I'll go into more detail in a minute, are aligning a vision and action, promoting staff engagement, making incremental changes, creating collaborative relationships, fostering a distributed leadership, and continually assessing and learning. Sound good, don't they? So, kind of got me thinking. So I looked into it in a little bit more detail and came up with some pros and cons of each of those principles. But there are dependencies on the organisation's complexity and the nature of the change to see if they could work or not. Just as one reminder, I will be publishing one of my infamous info decks on LinkedIn about this subject in the very near future. So look out for that if you are a member of LinkedIn. Okay, so let's go. Let's talk about the pros of the pros, first of all, of managing principles. So first of all, flexibility and adaptability. By working with principles, change managers have a lot more freedom to adapt to unforeseen circumstances. We know, don't we, that change initiatives rarely go as planned, and having a rigid structure can lead to frustration and inefficiencies when deviations occur. Looking at tailored solutions, relying on principles encourages a deeper understanding of specific organisational culture, stakeholder dynamics, and the specific context of the change, which leads to more customised and relevant strategies rather than forcing a predefined model onto a situation that might not align very well. Okay, moving on to simplicity and focus. Change principles cut through the complexity of detailed methodologies by focusing on core universal elements of successful change, which can make it easier to keep sight of what's more important and avoid getting lost in basically situations that you can't control. What about encouraging learning and growth? Since principles are at a more higher level, they can push change managers to think critically and creatively rather than simply executing a checklist, which fosters continuous learning and the ability to innovate within the change process. Okay, what about overcoming the one-size-fits-all? So the problem is that no single model or process works consistently, as I said earlier, across organisations. So principles by nature are more adaptable and can accommodate the diversity of change initiatives and contexts. So, pros. Now let's move on to the cons of managing change by principles. First of all, lack of structure. Don't we just love structure? That's why we love all our models and methodologies. But there is a lack of structure if you manage by principles. So while flexibility is a benefit, the absence of a structured plan can be problematic for some organisations, especially those that rely on clear milestones and progress tracking. Then, moving on, inconsistent results, even though principles are meant to be adaptable, and I've said before, this can sometimes lead to inconsistent execution. Just hang on 1 minute while I take a drink. Because different individuals may interpret or basically interpret them in different ways. It's also harder to measure success. Detailed plans with specific deliverables and milestones make it easier to measure progress and success. Without these, it can be more difficult to demonstrate your value, track performance, or identify areas that need improvement. Moving on to the good old resistance from stakeholders. Some stakeholders, especially in leadership positions, I always have a go at leadership, don't I, may expect clear, detailed plans to feel comfortable with a change process. It also depends heavily on the experience of the change manager. So a principles-based approach requires a highly skilled and experienced change manager, because without this deep expertise, there's a risk that critical aspects of the change may be missed or not handled properly, as there are fewer guidelines to follow when you're going through principles rather than structure. There's also an issue about difficulty in scaling. For larger, more complex changes, working with just a set of simple principles might make it harder to scale the effort across different teams or departments. You know, a well-defined model, can help ensure alignment across the organisation, whereas principles might result in different interpretations and approaches. And my final thought, thank goodness, I hear you say, working to principles rather than detailed plans could allow for a more agile and context-driven approach to change management, especially in organisations with a high degree of change readiness and experienced change managers. However, in situations where consistency, predictability, and clear accountability are important, having a detailed plan or model to complement these principles could ensure a smoother execution and stakeholder buy-in. This kind of aligns with my previous thoughts about the limitations of detailed planning and the necessity to allow change managers' experience to drive decisions, but perhaps the blend of high-level principles with a relatively flexible framework. Let's take my practical framework approach to change, for instance. Plug, could be a balanced approach to go forward with. Well, what do you think? Bit of a long one, longer than normal, but it's an interesting concept. So no plans, well, some plans pulled together with some principles, so a hybrid approach. Have you ever thought about it? Well, I don't know. I've never thought about it because obviously I'm not in project work anymore. So, but it's an interesting concept, isn't it? Yeah. So people like principles. Some people don't like to work to plans and be told what to do and deliver by an expected date. Anyway, let me know what you think, okay? And I'll see you. I do have a one for next week, and it's an interesting one because it's about gender in change management. Yeah, that'll be interesting, I hope. See you then.